let's talk Oklahoma City Thunder. A surprise, sort of, last season, and now they're going to back it up. Have they gotten better? I think so. And so does Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NBA fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and I'm at that stage in life where I stay out of discussions. Even if you want to say that 1 + 1 = 5, you're right. Have fun. I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always to argue 1 + 1 = 5 at redrock_bball, on TikTok at redrock_bball, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode, who is it brought to you by? That is a good question. It's actually brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more. Across the summer, sports are less. It's fewer sports, but that doesn't mean that FanDuel's not there for you, because every day they're giving every customer either a boost or a bonus all summer long. So go to FanDuel.com to get started. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free, and we are available on all platforms. So I'd like a bang, a thumb, a comment, an extra bang, extra comment maybe. Do all that, engage, share it. We're talking Thunder. Excited to talk Thunder, so let's talk Thunder. So we're talking Thunder. There's only one man that I know that can talk Thunder with me, and that is, of course, the venerable Rylan Stiles. Rylan, welcome back to the show for, I don't know, 4th or 5th year in a row.
Thanks for having me on. Always fun to preview this season.
Yeah, and this is a slightly different tenor to previous seasons. We were pretty optimistic last preseason, probably not to the level that things ended up for Oklahoma City. And now I guess the expectations and the pressure around this team are going to be slightly different, given that they won 57 games but did not make it through to either the conference finals or the NBA finals. They've made big off-season acquisitions, and they're starting. They haven't fully pushed all the chips in, but we're starting to get to that direction. So is it a little bit of a different vibe around the team? Are you feeling, or is that more just external stuff?
Yeah, I think that there is a different vibe to the team just because of what it symbolizes that they've done this offseason. Trading Josh Giddey, signing Isaiah Hartenstein. Like, these are moves that, independent of what you put out there publicly, it has to signal privately that you're all in on this year. You're gunning to try to win games as much as possible. And the crutch of internal development is lessened now. Of course, this is still a very young roster. So they're still going to grow and they're still going to develop. That's a big part of what they're still doing. But the biggest thing is they believe that they can win a championship. They believe that they can contend. And so that's the new signal. Whereas last year, you were still waiting around to see what direction they might take after that play-in appearance. Were they going to be good enough to make the top 6? Were they going to be a play-in team again? This year, all bets are on the Thunder to win the West, and they have to now deliver.
Yeah, they do. Simple as that. And let's take a look at what they actually did to try and get to that next step in terms of the guys that they brought in. And there's 2 really big ones there. It's Isaiah Hartenstein on that huge contract, getting him away from the New York Knicks. They trade Josh Giddey away to bring in Alex Caruso. In the draft, they do bring in Dillon Jones. They drafted AJ Mitchell. They drafted Nikola Topic as well. We're not going to talk about him because he's not going to play for this season. Alex Ducar also signed a 2-way deal, but they made some significant moves in bringing those 2 players in. So with all of these guests that I have on, I ask the question, who is the biggest addition? And for you, like for most of them, it's pretty easy. Like there's one player. But for the Thunder, there were 2 real clear options that you could have gone with. You, Rylan, said that the biggest addition is Isaiah Hartenstein. Why?
Yeah, I think that the biggest difference is what Isaiah Hartenstein brings to the table. Caruso, massive, and really Caruso is a quality of life improvement, while Isaiah Hartenstein overhauls this roster and overhauls what this team is capable of. Because as much as you might like Jay Will, and he is a very serviceable player in a vacuum, he's not good enough to be your primary backup big man. And so now you have a guy who's capable of protecting the rim, who's capable of helping you on the glass, who makes those double big lineups that you ran only a little bit, only 2% of your minutes, but still makes those better. But the most important thing is you can now blanket a 48-minute game in 48 minutes of rim protection. That was an avenue the Thunder could not get to last year. Whereas with Caruso, yes, he makes life incredibly easy. He's a massive upgrade from Josh Giddey. But, in reality, they could have done a better job of like mixing and matching Joe, Wiggins, and Wallace to get to a more easier lineup and easier style a year ago. They could not in any way have patched together a rotation that duplicates what Hartenstein will bring. So I think that that's why he's the biggest addition.
I agree with that because you're right. Like Caruso's good. He's a big upgrade. He's awesome at what he does, but you can't manufacture Isaiah Hartenstein out of nothing. Like you can't do that. You can't adjust players around. You've only got Chet Holmgren there to play. You can't get Jalen Williams, who can't really protect the rim, and Kenrich Williams, who's not really a center but does play center to fill that role. And I think one of the things with Hartenstein is people will look, and if they're watching here on the video, they can see the numbers from last season. He's under 12% usage. He played 25 minutes. He had 8 points and 8 rebounds. People go, well, look, why would we pay that much money? It is really important to note that that sort of a role is very, very specific to playing under Tom Thibodeau, that insanely low usage. That is not what Hartenstein has been in other stops in his career. And I don't expect, Rylan, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, that he's going to be out there playing as the Tom Thibodeau type of center who just never does anything offensively. I think we're going to see a slightly different statistical shape and the way that his game is used versus the way that it was in New York. So I think people are going, why would you pay that much money for a guy that averages 8 points in 25 minutes? I think that there is just so much context around that he won't be used that way for the Thunder.
Yeah, I can't think of very many coaches who are as diametrically opposed as Thibodeau and Mark are. Like what Mark wants from these guys is like to spin the 82-game season playing 12 players, 11 players a night, and really allowing them to spread their wings, find what they can do, find creative advantages for themselves. And with that comes, you're going to see Hartenstein, I think, shoot more. That is an area of his game that Hartenstein himself talked about at his introductory press conference like 3 times on his own, talking about his 3-point shot. Now, are they going to go hog wild and make him a designated stretch 5? Of course not. But it is going to be a part of his game that's different than what it looked like in New York. I also think that, using his playmaking more, even more so than New York did, will be massive as well, because Mark's going to let these guys get put in different positions, and he's going to let some offense get ran through them. I mean, you can go back and like every team that Mark's ever coached, from his Al Horford days to Chet to Jay Will, he loves to use big men as passers in the high post. There are very few big men who can pass at the level of Isaiah Hartenstein, and especially with that backup unit that does not have a clear-cut playmaker aside from staggering starters. I think that you're going to really tap into some of his creation on the ball.
I agree with that. And I did something on him when he signed with the Thunder, talking about the possibility of him playing and him next to Chet, and say that Hartenstein can shoot. And people cooked me. They said, he can't shoot. We talk about, look at these numbers. Like, he actually can. He had not a great shooting season in New York, but he wasn't allowed to really shoot at a huge amount. And yeah, he hasn't ever shot at big volume, and he did have a 40% season, but on really low numbers. I do believe he is not. We're not talking Jalen Duren here. We're not talking, someone like Nick Claxton who never shoots a 3. We're talking about a guy that maybe can, but is not going to be scared to and expand his game out a little bit, because it is just, again, like you said, Rylan, it's a very different environment here versus the one that he was in New York under Tom Thibodeau. On the flip side of all of this, we have got players that left the team, of course. And we've already talked about one of those, and that's Josh Giddey, who was sacrificed to bring in Alex Caruso. Gordon Hayward, after just consistent complaining, he is retiring from the NBA. He's just packed up and said, I'm done. Bismack Biyombo, who knows, maybe he comes back at some point. Lindy Waters, the third Hall Pass legend, he heads across to the Golden State Warriors. And then Mike Muscala, another Thunder legend, he retires. So we did have some changes there, obviously. The biggest loss is, it's inarguably out of that group, I would say, Josh Giddey, and that's exactly what you said. This is going to tie into something I talk about a little bit later, but Giddey was marginalized quite a bit this season. He did make improvements. He shot better from the free throw line. He is a guy that, despite what you think of him as a player, he does take a lot of possessions and a lot of the ball up. So look, when we're talking about like biggest losses, do you see this as like a very, very clear win when you upgrade that to Caruso, or does it open up some other questions that still need to be answered?
Yeah, I think that when it all comes out in the wash, it will be an upgrade for both sides. I think that the Thunder have a massive upgrade when it comes to Caruso. I think defensively, he's a huge upgrade, defending 1 through 4 and playing that role the Thunder need from him. I also think that he's a somewhat upgrade in this role as a playmaker, only because the way Josh Giddey is a playmaker is not maximized next to J-Dub and Shea and Chet. The way Caruso playmakes in the flow of a game and creates advantages as an on-ball player, it is absolutely highlighted by the better players around him. As you saw in his Lakers stint, as you saw in Chicago, like his version of playmaking perfectly fits what the Thunder are trying to do. And then for Josh Giddey, it was completely unfair last year to ask Josh Giddey to play that role, a role that could not be further from what you intended upon playing him in whenever he was drafted. It's just a product of how good the Thunder got, of how good Shea and J-Dub got along the way. So I think that he gets a fresh start. He gets to play a role that will allow him in a contract year to have a fantastic season and both sides walk away happy. But I do think that the biggest losses is his rebounding whenever he wanted to compete, because there were some nights he took off on the glass, but whenever he was locked in, he really helped the Thunder on the glass and allowed them to create advantages playing small. And then he was a fantastic inbound passer, which you blend that with the Thunder's athleticism, with the Thunder's ability to cut and Mark's creativity, and you stole possessions, countless possessions that way. Who takes over that role? I don't know that there's a clear-cut answer on this roster, but if those are your two big trade-offs, I think that Caruso does more for you in the long run as a 40% three-point shooter who plays off ball better, who complements Chet and J-Dub and Shea better. I think that you clearly take that upgrade if you're OKC.
I don't want to talk too much about Giddey because he's not on the team anymore, but one of the big things that people talked about the Thunder lacking through the playoffs was rebounding and getting in Hartenstein. You go, well, okay, they've solved that problem, but you lose Giddey, who was their second best rebounder, so it does sort of solve that problem, but it also maybe doesn't solve it quite to the level that the expectation is, because it's not adding Hartenstein on top of what they were doing. It's adding Hartenstein and subtracting Giddey's ability to grab boards, because before Chet came, like, he was their best rebounder as their point guard. So like, he has been a big part of that, and now they've got to figure out that sort of way to I guess account for that, which is doable, but it's not as just a clear cut of Hartenstein, just adds on to everything that was there. We've got more stuff we're going to talk about, Rylan, but first of all, I'm going to tell you that today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. We all know that our schedules can get busy. Summer for you guys in the States is coming to an end. Basketball season is ramping back up, and there are just things that become busy. Non-negotiable things that you have to do might mean that self-care things fall by the wayside, but you should make your self-care non-negotiable as well, whether that is going to the gym and skipping leg day. Maybe it is just going to therapy. Whatever it is that makes you happy, you've got to try and find that time to keep yourself well. And that's where BetterHelp can come in. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. So just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. So never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Okay. So we've looked at the comings and goings on this team. Let's take a look now at the projected starters of this group. And again, with a lot of teams, it's relatively straightforward. And I think for the majority of the Thunder lineup, it's straightforward. Interesting to me that when I asked you to give me your projected starters, you do have Alex Caruso starting there alongside Shea, Dort, Jalen Williams, and Chet Holmgren. Again, we can go back to the Isaiah Hartenstein part of this. Did that, like, how set are you that they won't start Hartenstein? Do you think that they just want to be keeping Chet as that starting five? Or do you think it might be one of those things where Dagnott, which he's done so much with the reserves, is just mix and matching depending on situation, opponents, just how players are playing?
Yeah, I think that this situation is more fluid than last year. Like last year, if the five guys were healthy of Shea, Giddey, Dort, Dub, and Chet, those were the five guys that started. I think this will be a bit more fluid than that. But in general, I think that that's your starting five for a multitude of reasons. First and foremost being that since the day the Thunder drafted Chet, regardless of the outside noise, even through a Liz Frank fracture, they've developed him and they've talked about him and they've brought him up as a center. And this does not really change that. It adds to it because, as we mentioned, one of their biggest downfalls, you can talk about Josh Giddey all you want to. One of their biggest downfalls last year, if not the biggest, was that when Chet Holmgren was off the floor, you could not protect the paint. And that's massive in a series that you lost to Dallas with a 0-point differential in 6 games. And Derek Lively and Gatford were able to just dominate that series for the most part. And so if you were to start them together as two guys who don't play an abundance of minutes, you're now having stretches of games again that are occupied by only Jay Will on the floor as a big. And we've seen that song and dance before, and that's just not a good recipe for success a lot of the time. So for two guys who don't play a huge share of the minutes, both guys that are like 30 points or less a game, 30 minutes or less a game, I think that you're going to want to see them kind of utilize a Hartenstein backup unit because he can help with the playmaking. He can help with the rim protection in a big way. And another thing I think that gets discounted is whenever you stagger off Caruso and stagger off Dub, what you're going to have is the best screener that they've ever gotten to enjoy playing with, at least in Oklahoma City, for Jalen Williams. And that makes life so much easier on his guards. And he can make the offense come smoother with that secondary unit all the way around. So I just think that it helps the Thunder a lot more than it hurts to put him with that secondary group.
Whatever it is, whether it's Caruso that starts or it's Hartenstein that starts, in the end, the minutes, from my perspective, even from people playing fantasy, become more important. So who do you think ends up playing more minutes per game, Caruso or Hartenstein?
I'm going to go with Hartenstein because I think that Caruso is battling a situation where, like, especially in the regular season, you're going to want to play, Shea, Caruso, Dort, Wallace, Wiggins, Joe, J-Dub, whenever he slots into some guard minutes plus forward minutes. So you're quickly eating away at these minutes. And we haven't even discussed Kenrich. We haven't discussed any of the rookies because we know the Thunder want to get them sometime at some point. We haven't discussed at all Usman Dieng, who they spent a lottery pick on, and kind of want to see where he's at. So just by the sheer volume of players that you have and want to get a look at, I think that you're going to see Hartenstein have less of that, take away from his minutes, and they're going to want to use him more. So I think that Hartenstein ends up with the higher minute per game total, even if he does come off the bench.
I think that's probably right as well. Let's look at their bench, because you mentioned most teams will go with 4 main rotation guys or 5 guys coming off the bench. The Thunder are going to go deeper because they are deep, and we've got Cason Wallace, Isaiah Joe, Aaron Wiggins, Hartenstein, the 2 Williamses, not including J-Dub. We've got Jalen Williams and Kenrich Williams in that group, and that doesn't include any of the rookies. It doesn't include Usman Dieng in that group. But this is a pretty strong rotation group. Cason Wallace was a surprise as a shooter last season. Isaiah Joe and Aaron Wiggins got new deals. How do you see, Wiggins played a lot of 4 last season? Do you think that he's going to be sort of transitioning more into a specialized more sort of wing role with the way that the team is now structured, or are they going to continue to like this sort of small ball 4 look through all units?
Yeah, I think that ultimately, they're not abandoning small ball, which I think nationally might get talked about differently here as we preview things. But the whole benefit of adding Hartenstein is that you can still get all of the reward of dominating teams with how small you can go and running them off the floor. But now they can't counter it as easily, because if they tried to counter it by going huge, you can now do that as well. You also have Hartenstein. So I still think that they're going to go with Wiggins playing some small ball, with Kenrich playing small ball, and the Thunder ultimately having some small lineups out there. I think that for Aaron Wiggins specifically, he has the new contract now. You pay him that money, although it's still a bargain contract, you still paid him. Now you've got to play him. I think that if, from a fantasy perspective, if you're going to bank on somebody in this bench unit that has so many moving parts, and each night you might see one guy get 10 minutes this night and then 0 minutes the next night, I think that one of the more consistent outcomes will be Wiggins, just because of how many guys he can fill in for. So throughout the course of an 82-game season, playing fantasy basketball, on any given night, somebody steps on a camera operator, somebody doesn't feel well that night in the middle of the winter, somebody got elbowed in the face, and no matter the position that player that it happens to on the Thunder plays, Wiggins can fill in for them. And there's not very many players like that in the NBA, so I think that will naturally increase kind of his workload. So I think that Wiggins will play some of that small ball forward primarily, but he can also fit in anywhere.
I agree. He's got great flexibility to move to different positions, and that's one of the key strengths of this team as well. They've got so many different combinations, and very few single position players, which I think is, we see that so much even with like the champions, the Celtics, they're exactly the same. Guys who can just move and fill in and adjust where they need to adjust. I asked all of the hosts, Rylan, who was a player they wanted to watch, a guy, whether it's a breakout player or it's someone that we need to pay some attention to for whatever reason. And I was very interested in your response to this, because your answer to the guy that you're wanting to watch was a guy that they drafted in the first round. Now, people who know my show know that I'm not a big fan of this guy as an NBA prospect, but that's Dillon Jones, who put up gigantic numbers at Weber State. He is, I don't really know what sort of, I guess he's a Thunder player. He can play the 4, he's sort of a 3, he sort of does bits and pieces of everything. They traded back into the first round to select him. We listed off those top 11 players there. He wasn't a part of that. So what do we think of Dillon Jones? How did you view his summer league? I watched a few of his games in person. I thought he was very sort of similar to how he was at Weber State, but the shooting isn't there. He can do a lot of different things, but I'm not really sure how that sort of lower athleticism or scaling back his role works. So what are you expecting from Dillon Jones, or how he can be used by this team?
So I thought he was much better in Salt Lake City than he was in Vegas in Summer League. I think that the value of Jones comes from trying to envision him next to more quality players in that reduced role, kind of as an off-ball player primarily. But the reason I'm so interested to see him is because this is a guy that the Thunder tried the draft last year in the second round. He rejected that. He wanted to go back to school and become a first-round pick. So he's not on any first-round mocks hardly, and the Thunder still trade back up to the first round, albeit just for 5 future seconds, and it doesn't really impact them in any way, shape, or form. But still, trade back into the first round to get this guy and make that dream come true for him. Why? Why have you been coveting this guy for 2 years now? If we all agree that the Thunder are a very smart front office and quality drafters, there's got to be something there. And I just kind of want to see what it is and what you're looking at to deem him worthy of 5 future seconds, which we know as you're building a contender, they don't sound valuable right now, but you get to the trade deadline, there are a billion quality veterans to help you patchwork through a season that are available for 2 seconds every single deadline. And you are expected to contend for the next 5-6 years, and that's 5-6 deadlines worth of trades that you can make with that haul you give up for Dillon Jones. What's the reason that for 2 straight years you valued him? I think it's because he perfectly fits what the Thunder represent. He can play guard, he can play power forward, he can play anything in between. But what does that look like on an NBA floor? I would imagine that primarily he'll play with the blue at the beginning of the season, especially. But whenever he comes to the NBA and plays at this level, because we understand that the Thunder will play him at some point, they're going to play 12 guys a night. What does that look like? And what was the selling point to kind of be held by him if you're the Thunder front office? I'm very, very interested in that.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of approaching that question. It's not like he's going to come out and cook necessarily, but you want to be what are they going to do? Where are they going to use him? Why do they want him? What's the part? And we do know the Thunder is a very good front office, one of the best, but they are not immune to making mistakes. They have made many, many mistakes, and as has every front office. So I don't know how Dillon Jones is going to work out, but like you, I do want to watch because I don't think it will work. But they also don't need him to work this season. They can see what happens and see where it goes and see where it develops. But he's an interesting name whose stat set, if you just look at it in isolation, it looks awesome. He did so many different things through college. Whether that comes across the NBA, well, that's the question that we're going to see over the next couple of seasons. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. It is the summer still for a little bit, but the sports remain a little bit thin. A little bit thinned out because that's what happens. But FanDuel doesn't care. They've got stuff for everybody. Right now, all through the summer, every customer, not even the people who just sign up now, everyone who's a customer on FanDuel gets something every day of the summer. They get a boost or a bonus. So, you've got the Olympics still running. You've got NFL preseason starting up. You've got college football coming in a few weeks. You've got the NBA preseason in a couple of months. All that stuff is going to start to repopulate your FanDuel screen, and you're going to have these boosts and bonus that you're going to be able to have there to get started and to really start to use that sports knowledge. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel's also an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball, and don't forget to gamble responsibly. All right, so mentioned this guy's name in passing already. Make or break time for Usman Dieng. And you talked about him already. You talked about the Thunder being good at drafting. So far, this has not been a good draft pick. That doesn't preclude him from developing at some point and becoming good, but he's not at this stage. So when you say make or break for Usman Dieng, what are we looking at here? Because again, he played as a third-year player in Summer League. I wouldn't have said that he dominated. He averaged 4 points last season. He played 11 minutes a game. The shot's still a little bit iffy. His idea was a 6'9" point forward player with some shooting and defensive ability, but we haven't seen any of it really on an NBA stage. Where are we at? You say it's make or break. Does that mean like we decline a rookie option? He's traded away for nothing. Like, what's the idea here?
Yeah, I think that if he does not show NBA caliber talent this season, he goes the way of Trey Mann, whether that looks like declining an option or just throwing him in a ending up meaningless trade in the sense of on-court production. Obviously, that Trey Mann trade for Hayward opened up the ability to sign a Hartenstein, but did not net anything on the court yet until Hartenstein plays. But I just think that with Usman Dieng, when you look at the fact that they just gave up 5 second-round picks for Dillon Jones, and they really like him, they've liked him for 2 years. Plus, they're going to have Topic coming back next season. Plus, they're going to have A.J. Mitchell in the fold, who they really like in the second round of this year and traded up for him as well. And they're going to have 3 first-round picks next year and a loaded draft class that would have lacked this draft class, which was so bad, and they still came away with 3 rookies. At that point, you're running out of real estate to continue to develop Usman Dieng if he can't get on the floor at some point this year. And the pathway for him then not to get on the floor is by being passed up by guys who you've drafted this year. So I think that matters as well. And I think that like it's hard to fit the true make or break criteria for the Thunder because as we mentioned with Dillon Jones, it doesn't really matter if Dillon Jones doesn't pan out or Us doesn't pan out because you've already done enough at the top. And these picks are explainable of like the Us pick was a lottery pick in 2022. You look back on it now and say, wow, you put a lottery pick in Usman Dieng. But at the time, you fell in love with the 6'11" frame with guard ability. And at the time, you were still throwing darts and just looking for as many hidden gems as you have. We didn't know Shea would be a top 5 MVP guy 2 years in a row. We didn't know that J-Dub was destined for an all-star appearance. We didn't know exactly what Chet Holmgren was, although we felt really good after that draft about Chet Holmgren. So I think that it's easy to explain away this quote-unquote miss as it appears to be on paper right now. But if he can't figure it out this year, there's little to do because the bottom line is he's already made strides in the G League and as much strides as you can make. I mean, last year he looked worlds ahead of where he was as a rookie in the G League. He helped power the Blue to the G League finals and win the championship and became finals MVP. And in the G League, he looked awesome and in control and more physical and career high in dunks. And you can list off all that he accomplished down there, but it didn't even translate to Summer League yet in a meaningful way that you would have imagined. Like you would have imagined that like in Salt Lake City, he just torched those guys when he really didn't. Like he didn't play good in game 1. He played fine in games 2 and 3. He did not just dominate games 2 and 3, which is not a great sign. I think what happens is it's similar to how they treated Poku. It's similar to how they treated Trey Mann. I would imagine that like fresh out of the gate this season, October, November, that you're seeing a lot of Usman Dieng, and he's either going to sink or swim. And if he sinks, he goes to the Blue and you figure out what to do with it later, whether it's in the deadline, whether it's in the offseason. And if he swims, that's awesome. Like he's now a part of this rotation in some way, and you move on from there as well. So, but I think that if I had to guess, like that's kind of going to be where the Thunder kind of treat him in this make or break season, because I just don't see how if he's not ready by the end of this season, how much longer you can do this.
I agree. You're right. There's so many things happening that are coming in the future that like it has to be. It has to be this season. Otherwise, it's just not going to be something that happens on this team. Let's take a look at the major storyline for this squad. I think it's easy to look at an overview and say, well, they were awesome and now they need to push forward and make a finals or win a title or whatever. I want to go a little bit, dig sort of under that a little bit, and we've talked about the rebounding issue, but I want to focus on something that hasn't really been mentioned a huge amount, I don't think, and that's like, yes, Josh Giddey had some concerns. A lot of those were defensive. You lose him and you add Alex Caruso. Is there enough offense now on this team, especially in the starting group? Like, is Shea can he take an extra offensive level up? Like, can he take on more usage? Because Giddey was not a low usage player. He was a guy that had the ball a lot. He generated offense. He took a lot of shots. Is there enough offense now on this team, or is that something that is of a concern, or am I just like making shit up here?
Yeah, I think that there is enough offense, because I think that while Giddey had the usage numbers, and even whenever you look at the starting lineup, like the starting lineup was like a +7, +8 as a group, and to the national audience, maybe it feels like why are Thunder fans complaining? This is one of the best lineups in basketball. They've played the most minutes. They've gotten a +7, +8 outcome. They really struggled to get there and labored to get to a +8, and now life on paper just looks so much easier, because you look at how Giddey was tasked with that usage and playmaking. Again, it just came in off-ball settings where he's in the corner, people are ignoring him. He's either going to make the shot or miss the shot, and it can look good if he's on, like he was on in Milwaukee, he was on in New York, he was on in these standalone games. It can look really awesome then. Then teams start respecting his shot, and then he can get back to his passing. But whenever he was off, it was just brutal for the Thunder's offense. And I think that with Caruso, you take a massive step back from what he can do as an individual playmaker, but you take a massive step forward with how teams have to defend him and thus defend Chet. So, for example, if teams try to cross-match with Chet and no longer put a big on Chet as they did down the stretch of that season, and now they're putting kind of a forward on him and camping their center in the paint and ignoring Josh Giddey. If you choose to ignore Alex Caruso, who's a 40% shooter from three, the Thunder are going to make you pay for that, and they're going to be able to take advantage of it. But by the same token, if you choose to then play them straight up and put a center on Chet, well, then Chet's just going to take you behind the woodshed. So how do you defend this Thunder team now without that glaring, weakness? And for Giddey fans, they would say that the weakness was not putting him on ball more, but nonetheless, that's how the Thunder wanted to play last year and how they want to play in the future. So Caruso is just a much better fit away from the basketball. I do think that in the secondary unit, where Josh did get to run more of the show without Shea on the floor, whenever they would stagger him, J-Dub, and Chet off the floor to start the second quarter, they'd have them on and have Dort and Shea off. Whenever he got to run that show, yes, you now have to see a step up from Chet, from Caruso, from Cason Wallace, tapping into his point guard background as playmakers. And Sam Presti admitted as such the second he made the trade and hopped on a Zoom with us of we're expecting that this will be taken care of by Chet Holmgren's ability to become a better on-ball scorer and an on-ball playmaker. And so we'll see if that actually does happen. But I don't think it's completely unfounded, your concern. But I do think that there's a chance that they just simply have enough because of how much easier it is to get buckets for those top three guys.
I think the Wallace thing is really interesting because initially when he was drafted, I went, I don't really like this fit here. I'm not really sure. It doesn't make sense. I went, no, I think he can actually play with Giddey. I also think it makes Giddey expendable to make then Wallace into a point guard. He didn't really play any point guard last season, but he is a point guard. He's a point guard from Kentucky, and we know these players tend to really flourish once they are moved into a role that suits their abilities in the NBA. So I do think that it hasn't happened, so we can't bank on it, but I do think that there is a huge possibility that Cason's able to step into a completely different role to what he had last season. But that does bring me to a burning question for this upcoming season, Rylan. It is regarding a guy that you talked about him earlier on in the show, talking about an eventual or upcoming all-star bid for Jalen Williams. He has to do more. He has to do more offensively now without Josh Giddey. He needs to, because Shea was the guy that initiates a lot. Josh Giddey did that too, but now Jalen has to step up into that second role. He needs to take on more usage. He needs to be more of an initiator. He had a slow start to the season. He was awesome through the second half. I thought he had some struggles in his first playoff series. I thought he wasn't quite at his level. So he's got to be ready for more. Do you think that Jalen Williams is ready for more, or is some of the showings in the playoffs where you go, that was a little worrying? How confident are you that he can? Because he can't. I don't think he can sort of float at that same level he was last year, which was still really good. He has to take a next step, I think.
Yeah, the Thunder are certainly confident in it. I think that it'd be wise from a non I'm sure that the Thunder organization, they clearly have to be confident in it. From someone not associated with them, you have to just kind of take a wait and see approach, because in the playoffs, like you look what happened in the Mavericks series. Obviously, everything was clicking against the Pelicans. That series is almost kind of an outlier. Like you're not going to have everything click like that in many playoff series. That's why the Thunder, for as good as they were with Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook, they only had one sweep as a duo, like as a team in that whole legendary run. This was just the second sweep in franchise history. You're not going to have that kind of series again. Now, the Mavericks series, what is a little concerning, and these concerns can be put to bed as soon as this April. What was a little concerning is when you finally did break down and bench Josh Giddey, yes, things did get easier. And it wasn't just as simple as the Mavericks completely ignoring one of your 5 players out there. But it was not perfect, and it did not solve every single issue because of what you just mentioned of J-Dub was not good enough. Now, if we're gonna sit back here and say, hey, like the Thunder are gambling on him being good enough and like him taking that step. It was his first ever playoff run. Plenty of players have not played well in their first ever playoff run. That's fine. And what the Thunder have done is whenever him and Chet are ready to take that next step, whenever him and Chet are ready to be championship level players, this is a championship team around them.
Yep. And
that's where I think that the Thunder are ahead of the curve, because most teams will wait until these two guys, for example, prove that they're championship caliber guys and do it in the playoffs for a year, and then they go make their big move. The Thunder proactively made their big moves, and they're just prepared for whenever those two guys get ready, because they fully believe that those two guys will be ready at some point, whether it's this April or not. But certainly, he was not good enough against Dallas. He was a large part of why you lost in the second round. Even for we talk about Jay Will, we talk about Josh Giddey, a large part of why you lost against Dallas was not having that typical J-Dub offense that you enjoyed for the majority of the regular season. If that does come around, and look, Chet was not good offensively either, sure. but he made up for it in tenfold defensively. And I think that part of Chet's offensive shortcoming was because of J-Dub and a little bit of Shea too. Of his guards did not do what Dallas's guards did for Lively, and the Mavericks fans got a little over the edge and overzealous on the Lively Chet comparisons of the numbers. If Chet had Luka Doncic beating him the basketball, he would have broken records with how good he is. But the Thunder don't have the guard play necessary to set up their big man. At least they didn't last year. So they're banking on both those guys taking a step forward in that department of spoon feeding Chet. They're banking on J-Dub himself taking a step forward as a number 2 option. And if they're right, they'll win a championship. If they're wrong, they'll be out in the second or third round in the Western Conference.
I think part of my concern, and people do think that I am lower on Jalen Williams than others, which I guess is true. Like I was calling for him in his rookie season to start earlier than most, but I've also sort of pulled back on some stuff because there's one major thing that I have a concern with him. And look, he's 2 years in, plenty of stuff can change. He's got these great 3-point shooting numbers, which also, over the second half of the year, tailed off to become average. Like, I think he shot 37% over the final 25 games, and he was a 38% guy in the playoffs, which is good, right? But he doesn't take enough of them. Like, he just doesn't take enough threes. It's like under 4 per game that he's taking, which is a very low amount for someone who is allegedly shooting at such a high level. What do you think I don't want to hype too much on Jalen Williams here, but what is the priority? Is it doing more on-ball stuff, more creation, taking up some of the assist generation, shot generation of Josh Giddey? Or is it taking more of those shots and really using that shooting ability to a more beneficial level?
I think that the biggest flaw from J-Dub, and this was a flaw from really all the young guys except for Shea, the biggest flaw was that, like, in the regular season, what made them so great was that every single night they didn't settle. They didn't just jack up threes. They didn't take nights off on either end. And they worked for the perfect shot. And if you're doing that in October and you're doing that in February, it's going to be very easy to eventually, in the course of 24 seconds, get to the perfect shot. In the playoffs, you're not going to get that perfect shot. And I think that that's why his 3-point numbers are so low in the regular season, is because, like, he's not going to just settle for the first opportunity he gets to shoot the 3. He's going to get to the mid-range. He's going to get to the rim and really just attack you. And that's good. That's great. It lets you win games in the regular season. But as you saw against Dallas, sometimes your top 3 guys, they got to take quote unquote bad shots and make them. And the difference in these two teams was that, like, Thunder fans can cry all they want to about PJ Washington's outlier series. Yeah. You know how he had that outlier series? He took shots. Isaiah Joe didn't take shots. Kaysen didn't take shots. J-Dub didn't take shots. They didn't give themselves the opportunity for an outlier series. And so until J-Dub and Chet come around to the idea of, hey, we're the top three guys. We can take pretty much any shot we want to and be reasonable about it. Don't be Jordan Poole, but we are the guys who, like, our good shot is better than working for a great shot for Josh Giddey, or in this case, Alex Caruso. Until they get that in their mind, they're going to struggle a little bit in that setting. I think that it's not a massive red flag because it was his first playoff series. And we do have a sample size, of course, only being it in the regular season of J-Dub being in attack mode, but he wasn't in attack mode in round 2. That has to change if the Thunder want to go win a championship, and they do, and they believe it will change. And I think that it will. I think that J-Dub and Chet with Shea are a good enough trio to go win it all. But these young players have to get up to speed, and they're banking on them getting up to speed pretty quickly.
Yeah, I agree. I think they are good enough to win a title. It's also good to think that I'm not crazy, because I say, like, he's just got to take more shots. He's got to take more threes, and I've got no problem about what Jalen Williams does defensively. It's great. It's just that you've got to do more offensively, and now is the test, because it is cleared out for him to be that number 2 guy, to be that secondary ball handler. He has to do more, and we'll see. I think he can get to it. I don't know if he can get to this level of, where some people think that he's this top 10 player in waiting. I'm not sure about that, but we are going to get a lot of things sort of answered, or at least starting to get it answered this season. I asked every host, Rylan, for a bold prediction for their team heading into the season. Your bold prediction for the Thunder was that they win the Western Conference. So, is that bold? I guess they didn't make the Western Conference Finals last season. What is the one thing that we need to see, specifically that they need to do to win that? Like, what is it Chet doing more? Is it more shots from Jalen Williams? Like, what is that one thing that you need to see this change from last season?
Yeah, I hate to beat the last segment to death, but it has to be J-Dub and it has to be Chet looking like offensive forces. And like we talk about J-Dub a lot. There were times, in that Mavericks series where it was LeBron, JJ Barea, like there was smaller guys on Chet. He didn't shoot over, and I think that he's got to shoot over guys and feel more confident in taking those quote unquote bad or just average shots and not working for the perfect opportunity. But as long as we expect Chet and J-Dub in year 3 and 2 respectively on the court to take another step forward, that increase coupled with the Hartenstein addition, coupled with Caruso making life easier than Giddey did, I think is good enough to win them the Western Conference. Now, is it good enough to beat Boston, who are just running back a near perfect team? I wouldn't bet on it. I would still bet on the odds to say Boston wins the championship, even though it's hard to repeat. But for as tough as the Western Conference is, the Thunder have done everything possible to give themselves a championship core that can match up with any style of play. So like whenever you say styles makes fights, they can match up with any style. And they've kind of made themselves variant proof a little bit, just with the way that these guys get to their spots and hit shots, and not being overly reliant on the 3-point shot, not being overly reliant on a certain matchup to expose, but just playing well-balanced basketball and creating this kind of ability to break down their opponents. So I just think that they're the best team in the Western Conference. The Vegas says that, everyone says that. It's hard to get a bold prediction for a team that's projected to win 57 games again and win the West again. But actually accomplishing it, as you mentioned, whenever they have not gotten out of the second round and they just won their first playoff series since 2016, and this is only the second playoff run of this core, I think is still a little bold. But I think that they'll find a way, and I think that they'll do it.
I asked all the hosts again to give us a prediction on the team record. Now, someone in my last video said, hey, Josh, why aren't you giving your team record prediction? I will in September. I'm going to do it when I do my fantasy preview of the teams. Don't worry, that'll come. Last season, the Thunder won 57 games. Rylan, you have gone one more. You've gone to 58 and 24 for this Thunder team. So that is, sometimes a team can improve and not improve their record, and with other teams getting better around them, which I think is going to be the case here. But I think 58 is a totally reasonable idea for OKC. What would you say would be a disappointing regular season record? Is it 52? Is it under 50? Where do you go and go, well, something definitely went wrong here?
Yeah, I imagine that the 52 mark will be a good one. I think that it's more so based upon spots. If whatever the number ends up being dictated as in the Western Conference, for as good as we think it's going to be, I think Memphis will be back, and then we still have the 10 teams from last year. If you don't get a top 4 seed as this team is constructed, especially as this team is constructed in the regular season, they have a coach who cares about it. They have a team young enough to still care about it. They have players who project to play and not sit out games unless they do actually get hurt. Like if you don't get a top 4 seed in the West, even for as tough as it is, that is a disappointing regular season, I think. Obviously, it's hard to improve upon 57 games. And as you mentioned, you can win 56 games and be better than you were last year.
Yep.
But if you cannot host even the first round, it's a very disappointing year, barring injuries.
I agree. Last thing, Rylan, I am asking all of the hosts a question. It's not a super challenging question, but this one, it actually might be, because we're heading into the 24 and 25 season. And sometimes I feel like we know players' numbers, but we don't know everyone's numbers. So I want to know, can you name me a player? And I'm looking at the list of players here. There are like 25 players in Oklahoma City and even Seattle history who've worn the number 24 or number 25 for the 24-25 season. Who do you know any of them? Because I'm looking at this list going, that's a pretty weird list. It's not a number that's been used very often in this franchise's history. Can you name anyone who wore 24 or 25 for this team?
Well, AJ Mitchell is supposed to wear one of those 2 numbers this upcoming season. I'm not sure if he's already on there or not.
He is not on there yet.
Devin Hall was in the 20s.
Devin Hall, no, he did not wear one of these numbers. There are some players who are along that sort of line of guys, especially with a number 20. There's a bloke here that I've honestly never heard of from the dark days of 2022, that he was the last person to wear number 25. I honestly have no idea who this guy is. He played 2 games for the Thunder combined. If you can get this one, he played in the 21-22 season. He played 2 games, 11 minutes total. He went to Cleveland State University and Arizona State. I honestly have no idea who this guy is. He's the last player to wear number 25.
It's not Rob Edwards.
Holy shit, it is Rob Edwards. Unbelievable. That is why you are the Thunder. Who is Rob Edwards? How did you know that? Anyway,
so the Arizona State clue is what got it in, because of the Lou Dort Arizona State kind of background of all of it. But that was a dark time. That was a very dark time. Ken Hervey, was he?
No, the other names.
No.
Daniel Hamilton was one of those ones.
Okay.
Who wore that. Actually, Tabo Cephalosha wore 25 for 1 year apparently. DeAndre Liggins, Doug McDermott. No one has really worn 24 since Mateen Cleaves in the 2005-2006 seasons, who, again, that's like, we're almost talking 20 years ago. 24 Is 24 retired or something? I don't know what's going on.
Yeah,
24 is retired. They retired it for Spencer
until Seattle
Hayward.
gets a team back, it's retired.
Yeah, there you go. So that's why no one's on 24. But there you go, Rob Edwards. So you don't have to worry about, for the time being, talking about guys like Rob Edwards, Rylan, because the Thunder are no longer the black eye of the league. And if people want to hear about the Thunder, Locked on Thunder is going to have that all covered for you. What's going on for you guys this week over on the podcast?
Talking the Olympics, as Team Canada just got bounced in now. It's into preview season ourselves, just talking about how this team can come together, what they'll look like as they add in some new pieces who, like, on paper, should make massive upgrades. But we know that it does not always gel just that quickly. What are some issues that could arise with them? It's
going to be a great season. They're a fun team, an exciting team, and let's see where it all goes. Rylan, thank you again for jumping on and chatting about the Thunder with me.
Thanks for having me.
And that is the Thunder. They are a really interesting team. There is a change in the way that the team looks, obviously, which we'll get into later on when we do fantasy profiles of this through September. But a lot of high-end fantasy players, and there's going to have to be some changes with the way that they run things. And there's a change that you guys need to do as well. One of those is giving a thumbs up to this video. Leave your comment about what you think the Thunder are going to be this season, and is there any players that you're targeting or avoiding from this squad for fantasy? That is what we want to know. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.